Once we get going, Jen, if you can
I'll let you know. Yeah, I'll keep my mic on.
I was going to ask to put the link into the
Mm.
chat so that I can share it.
Yep. And
Thank
it's
you.
loading. It'll just be a second. We're live.
And do you want it open? Do you want your for
We're live.
questions?
We're live. Good afternoon, everybody. I believe we are live. Welcome to the afternoon session for the Scholars Strike Canada 2023 labor actions. My name is Desmond Cole, and I'm happy to be with you. Happy to be part of the organizing for Scholars Strike Canada. Happy to be bringing you this panel discussion called Confronting the Police and Their Clients. We're starting a little late today. Thank you for those of you who've been patiently waiting. Thank you for joining us. This conversation will be recorded so that you can come back and view it later. You can share it with other folks later. Appreciate you joining us this afternoon. We're just going to get started. I'm coming to you from Toronto, which is the traditional territory of many nations, but that includes the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, the Anishinaabe, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We are covered by the Treaty of the Dish with One Spoon. This is Treaty 13 territory. And everything that we're doing here in Scholar Strike is an attempt to be in solidarity with movements for Indigenous sovereignty, Indigenous life, Indigenous thriving, the return of land, the honoring of treaties. So we are very, very grateful to be able to broadcast this to you with our friends and partners. We're grateful to all of the volunteers and supporters and donors to Scholars Strike, all the people working behind the scenes to make this possible. Today's panel on confronting the police and their clients comes out of a desire to think about the police as a broader entity than just the people who get called when we phone 911 or the people who drive around in their cruisers in the streets. And today we'd like to talk more about how the police actually use other institutions in our society to expand their reach, to expand their legitimacy, to try and get to the communities that they want to target and surveil and arrest through other institutions. The institutions in particular that we want to talk about today are post-secondary institutions, public schools, and also the private sector, but particularly the oil and gas sector. To have that conversation, we are very fortunate to be joined by four guests. I'm going to introduce them briefly. First, Sam Tekla. Sam is an assistant professor of sociology at the University of Toronto Metropolitan University, and his research and scholarly work spans across the areas of Black and diaspora studies, urban studies, and sociology of education. I'm going to read shortened bios for everybody just because of the time that we've lost, so my apologies to the participants for that. Next is Chantal Spicer. Chantal is an organizer working in solidarity in the lands and people of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, while attending Simon Fraser University as a graduate student. She was a Solidarity and Social Justice Commissioner of the Teaching Support Staff Union. Ahona Mehdi. Ahona is a student community organizer based in Hamilton and an undergraduate student in the McMaster Political Science program. Ahona works as the education coordinator and interim and co-executive director at the Disability Justice Network of Ontario and with the Hamilton Encampment Support Network and the Hamilton Students for Justice. And finally, I'm very happy to welcome Chief Namox, who is a hereditary chief. He's the hereditary chief of the Tasyu Clan, which is one of the five clans of the Wet'suwet'en traditional territory, the Wet'suwet'en Nation, located in the central west part of what we now call British Columbia. Chief Namox has been one of the loudest voices opposing Coastal GasLink pipeline that is currently under construction in that part of the country and that threatens to do irreversible damage to the Wet'suwet'en territory. Thank you to each one of you for being here and joining us today. I'm so grateful. And I'm going to start to give you each a couple of minutes in the order that I introduced you to just introduce your own perspectives on this topic of the police and how the police are always finding ways to infiltrate and combine and partner with other institutions in Canada, and how you see that playing out in the field where you're working, fighting, resisting. So I'm going to go to Sam without further ado. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation, for inviting and for having us. I'm really heartened and glad for the opportunity to sit on this panel. The work that Scholar Strike Canada has done in organizing and convening us, and their steadfast commitments, to a set of ideals and ethics and politics in tumultuous and turbulent times. These are difficult times to do this work. So I'm thankful for being here and for the opportunity to sit and think with you all. Like I tell my students, the world is like fundamentally and drastically different than when we last met. We just had reading week. And we should note that these are not normal times. These are catastrophic and difficult times, but we still get a rare opportunity to sit together and think. So what are we going to do with that peculiar gift, right? So thanks again. I'll just note 3 different instances that to get us going of the ways that I've seen police or policing writ large, which is to say the logics of policing, the logics of the carceral society or state. So that's the prison, the logic of surveillance, the logic of capture, the fact that racialized and Black populations need to be watched and surveyed and controlled, how I see those kinds of logics in the different kinds of institutional or organizations that I frequent. So 3 examples. First example is the community organization sector. So I work with a community organization for a long time. And since being even like a young community worker, we would plan events. We work in a highly racialized community that's thought of to be a dangerous area. So all of these make up for an area that's overly policed. So, we plan events to try to convene and get together in public space. Sometimes that's all we have as a community organization that's stigmatized and under-resourced. And I remember receiving like notes or emails or calls from like the local police division, community cultural liaison officer, or some rendition of that sort, saying, hey, we know you're planning this kind of event at this public local square. Think we could jump on? Could we tag on? We'd love to support. We've got resources, and we can help. And mind you, we're a collection of small organizations just trying to do a little bit of community work here and there. The kinds of work that patch up the holes that the city or the province produce, right? These are where we find our communities, in these gaps. So we work in these gaps. And as a young community worker, I remember saying, oh, they got it like that. They have those kinds of resources, and they'll bring an officer and everybody, okay, cool. It's going to be in public. It's on the street. So, hey, and then I remember getting thoroughly educated by many members, other members, usually older than me, that would tell me about what kind of the politics involved, of course, of inviting police to events, but what the reason why they would be doing this kind of work, right? So from then on, I've kind of understood what it means to bring policing into your events as a community worker with community organizations. So with the community organization that I work with, we've put in a policy that we don't take funding from police, that we don't take resources from the police, and we don't openly invite police to our events. Now that provides us a different kind of viewpoint to the work that we do. But this is not the norm. Many other organizations, our colleagues, our comrades, and other community members who work at different organizations openly invite police and take their resources. So in many ways, the police are not only the police who survey and enforce us and profile us, but in many ways, they've also become funders for community programs. They deliver, quote unquote, social services, right? So because of that position that our organization has taken with regards to like really kind of finding other ways to do work outside of policing, it gives us a vantage point, a viewpoint to doing this kind of work differently. And just to close off that point, police, they come anyway to the events, whether we ask them or not now. Nobody tells the police what to do. Second example, really quickly, during the pandemic, I sat on kind of a committee working group that worked with school board officials, trustees, public and Catholic school boards. And what the school boards were, and again, like I said, I work in this under-resourced community area where a lot of folks didn't have technology to jump on the shift to digital education, virtual, right? So we had to find ways to connect the school boards and resources and laptops and get devices and Wi-Fi devices, portable Wi-Fi to folks who needed that to get on, to access their human right of education, which has gone through this drastic shift. So a lot of the school boards were finding that a lot of their students were just falling off contact. They were calling, they couldn't get in touch with them. And through these kind of just weekly check-in meetings in time of crisis, we were just checking in with each other. And just normally, the board officials and trustees told us that for these families that they couldn't get a hold of during the pandemic, they were doing wellness checks. And in a society that's based in carceral logics, wellness checks are performed by the police. Now, there's a whole host and plethora of reasons why families, especially precarious families, low-income families, families that have different kinds of family structures, were not responding to school board phone calls saying, hey, where's your kid? What's going on? We just want to check in, for a variety of reasons. So to introduce policing into that equation for a wellness check, which has our police don't have no other way of attending to, and attending is an interesting word, to a wellness check that doesn't involve them being fully armed, uniformed in their fully armed, really stealth-like looking cars. So that's a kind of second example. And lastly, I work at a university institution that's embedded in the downtown core of this city. And since I've started here, there's been ongoing conversations around safety, right? And this is after our kind of global reckoning and questioning of the role that policing plays in society. And there was a petition that was widely signed by thousands and thousands of both professors, employees, and students who were really grappling with the idea of what does safety mean in a campus that's really kind of embedded in the downtown. So does this involve like increased security, increased access cards? And just to show that the kind of, and many of these examples I want to point to are not spectacular. They don't involve tasers or excessive force on the street, but it is the fact that they are benign and their banality that is the point, right? So now I regularly get in my university emails, safety notices, which are just carceral prescriptions of a society, right? So assault suspect has been arrested. You can feel safe. Hey, you want to get these updates on your phone? Here's a text message to know what's going on. We're increasing the training of our security, which are just really junior police officers, right? So just to think about all of these ways that policing has, as both an institution, but as a logic, gets constantly reinforced and reaffirmed, and that the idea and the work that Scholars Strike Canada and abolitionists do in teaching us, we still have a long way to go, because the reflex, the safety reflex, policing is the safety reflex of a society that is based in carceral logics, right? So just some examples to see how every day, literally every day, policing gets reinformed, gets re-legitimized by, and I like the term the panel used, by their clients. Yeah, so I'll stop there and pass it on.
Thank you, Sam, very much. I'm going to go out of the order that I myself said that I would. And have we lost a participant? Have we lost Chief Namux? I can't see you on my screen, but I was going to ask you to go next if you could.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Thank you.
Okay, for ourselves, like dealing with Royal Canadian Mounted Police has been quite difficult, because you have to realize in 2017, they created another arm of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police called CURG, and that stands for Community Industry Response Group. And the title itself should tell you exactly why it was created. It was to protect industry. And they state that it was to protect industry from, well, demonstrated, well, number one, Indigenous people. We are the ones that will always protect our lands. I stood with our cousins of the Coast Salish against the TMX. And we know exactly what their tactics are. So they create this arm of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police called CURG. And they gave them free reign. There's really no accountability to anybody at this point in time. Whenever we ask for accountability, it gets bounced around. And you got to realize that British Columbia and Canada first put $75 million into this one arm, then they added another 36 million. And just this past year, like on one of our forestry roads, they spent $10 million just surveilling us. And that's taxpayers' money that they never got permission to spend on this unit. So simply protect pipelines, mining companies, next, whatever they consider is in the best interest of the province or Canada, which is their favorite thing when they come up against ourselves, protecting clean water, our freedoms, our rights and title, who we are. You have to realize we as Wet'suwet'en, we joined our cousins of the Gitxsan in the Delgamuukw Stay Away court case. So December 11th, 1997, Supreme Court said that we never gave up 1 centimeter of our territory, nor have we given up our authority on our lands, which means all these permits that were issued are illegal. So what they do is the RCMP are brought in, create this arm, then they're allowed to go before the courts and create injunctions, which is the only hammer they have. With these injunctions, they can arrest our people, remove them from the land, put restrictions on them, and give them a court date, which actually gets extended. So all the time that these court dates are extended, the restrictions on the land are in place. If you come on your land, you cross this imaginary line, you will be charged and you will be put back in jail. So when we talk about overreach of the RCMP and Krug itself, you know, there's a reward system there that I truly can't understand, because, you know, when all these orders, like we had 3 major raids on us, and we're talking a couple hundred of these militarized RCMP coming at us. I'm sure you've seen the videos of them coming at us. Now, the Attorney General at the time was rewarded for signing those orders. He's now the Premier of British Columbia. The former Attorney General was David Eby. And the Premier of the day was John Horgan. Well, he stepped down and now he works for a coal company. So that should truly tell you exactly how the province of British Columbia is being directed, simply by industry, right? And the markets. We ourselves, they put the narrative out that we're less than human, and yet we're the first humans on these lands. Now, all we want is clean water, clean air, a good future for all children. So we've gone above the RCMP and they are upset. I got to tell you, I've stared down the barrel of a gun so many times. I've gone to the RBC AGM. They moved it year before last from Toronto. They actually canceled it the day we landed as chiefs to attend it. This past year, they put snipers on the roof when we went outside to address the people who were there to support us. This is the way the RCMP are handled. Now you have to talk about what influence do they have outside of themselves being the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and who they have outreach to. Well, with CGL, which is actually TC Energy, the ones who have this here pipeline on the territory, they are owned 65% by KKR. Now, KKR is basically an investment firm. They look after retirement funds and all that, but they have in excess of $600 billion at their disposal. So that is what British Columbia is looking at. They need that money, they want that money, and that's why they label us as less than human, calling us extremists, and all we're doing is protecting our lands. So when you get companies such as KKR, they created an arm within KKR called the Global Institute. Now that Global Institute is actually ran by a former general who ran the raids on Afghanistan and Iran on behalf of the United States. He was also the head of the CIA. This is who runs that institute of KKR. So within KKR, and this is exactly who the RCMP deal with, they deal with these mercenaries that are brought onto our land. They say they have no association with them, and yet we film them talking to them, taking direction from them to make sure that we are the targets. Now, the one who runs KKR, David Petraeus, former general, former head of the CIA, he put out a book and he said, okay, number one, there are 4 steps he'll use. Reconciliation. But his view of reconciliation is buying out people to get support. You know, on our territory, we are the hereditary chiefs. The courts have said we are the authority. So they went around us and they started signing on with band councils who are elected. these are our House and Clan members. I can't speak badly of them. They are our people, but those agreements are illegal. So the second one that David Petraeus puts out in his book is legal prep, which means control the narrative, enhance injunctions, which is actually in how to deal with the RCMP and the courts, which brings the injunctions into place. And then kinetic operations, the threat of violence. You got to realize, like, when you're under threat 24 hours a day, whether it be psychological, physical, spiritual, it does take a toll. I'm very proud of our people and our supporters. We held them off. We've not budged an inch, and we never will. We are the authority, and it is our land. Everybody needs clean water, and this is what they're attacking, and our salmon, our food security. So when you talk about the RCMP and who they work with, and again, I simply have to go back to KKR and David Petraeus again. His fourth step was withdrawal, which means stir up all the trouble and then leave it up to the locals to settle it while they continue on with industry. So that means going to the schools, putting out the narrative that, oh, we're here to protect you. But meanwhile, telling the very children who are our future that they are doing it on their behalf. Meanwhile, they're killing the land, the water, the animals, the salmon. You know, we go above them. We go to the UN. 2 weeks from now, I'm going to be speaking in Geneva and letting them know exactly what is happening. Because, you know, in Geneva, you know, the UN has sent 3 letters to Canada telling them to stop what they're doing. And Canada has not responded once. And this is the United Nations. So right now, when they're doing the universal periodic review, I intend to speak again for the 4th time against Canada, against the RCMP, and the way they conduct themselves to the public, the way they're destroying this land, these waters, this planet. That's our duty as hereditary chiefs. We're not elected. My name is thousands of years old, and I'm proud to carry it. And this is our duty on behalf of all humans to do what we do. But when you get the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, actually, I'm sorry, but bastardizing is the only word I can use. The law to serve industry, that is wrong in a democratic country. We should not always be under threat of violence. We should not always have to fight off the RCMP who are coming at us. They are armed. They come with guns, helicopters, attack dogs. They come through our doors with axes and power saws. And this is Canada. And this is what they're trying to tell the public, that this is the right way to operate in this country. I think the very fabric and the democracy of this country is threatened because of the way they are conducting themselves. And that is the RCMP. So I think when you tell the truth, never blink, because the truth is always right. But when the narrative changes to their narrative of about industry and the almighty dollar is more than the human life, that is wrong. And also when they are trying to tell the world that Canada is such a great place, we need to look at the conduct of the RCMP. I belong to a group that is there to dismantle CURG. CURG should never have been created in this country, ever. If we're going to live under police military rule, why are we called democratic? Because that's not democracy. In a democratic country, we're all supposed to have a voice. And my fear is that they're trying to convince all people in so-called Canada to be quiet, toe the line, do as you're told, or you will be punished. The same way they used to do with carding, the same way that they used to go around saying that we have every right to enter your home without a warrant. We're going to do a safety check, but guess what? We're going to kill somebody in the process. This is what we face every day. And I think Canadians and everybody around the world need to be aware of that. And I think that all of you need to use your voice, because it's a strong voice. Don't ever let them convince you that your voice doesn't matter. And don't let them bother even trying to convince you that they know what's best for us, when all they know is violence, destruction, and destroying this planet. If you have questions, I'm open to it anytime, because I have a number of answers because we experience it. Thank you.
Trust me, I could fill more time than we have, Chief Nanox, but I'm going to come back to you. Thank you so much for that. Let me go now to Ahona. Ahona Mady, I want to bring you in with your experiences organizing against police in schools, in public schools in Hamilton, Ontario. Welcome, and go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I think when I look at policing in schools particularly, I think there are like probably three kind of lenses that I would look at it through. The first is, which is pretty obvious, the physical presence of police in schools, armed officers in schools. So looking at Hamilton's school liaison officer program, we had armed officers stationed in schools across Hamilton, and specifically most of them were secondary schools, densely populated with Black, Indigenous, racialized students. And so, yeah, what was happening in those schools was there was a lot of carding happening. There was the harassment of students, and we collected like hundreds upon hundreds of testimonials while I was a student trustee, looking at the experiences of students, looking at the experiences of parents, caregivers, with these armed officers that were in schools. Like one of the instances that we talk about a lot was the instance of a young Black autistic girl who was having a mental health crisis and was taken into the back of a police cruiser, handcuffed, and we're talking about an elementary student. So that physical police presence is a huge one. And I think when we try to talk about these stories, talk about these instances of assault and harassment and violence, I think what's really disturbing about the system and about these school boards is that they'll always come back to us with like narratives of how police are building community, right? I think one of the biggest things when I was a student trustee that came up was, yeah, we're like sharing hundreds of stories of the experiences of Black racialized students with police, but cops come into school and they play basketball with kids. Who's going to come into school and play basketball with kids? What are we going to do if that's not there anymore? So they really place this huge emphasis on the physical presence of police, glorifying police, and I think that's a huge part of it. But I also think there's the aspect of surveillance that is really huge, right? I think on top of the physical presence of police, I think the presence of police kind of informs the surveillance that happens, right? And we see this also with, the weaponization of CAS, the weaponization of different kind of so-called social services that will kind of criminalize and try to separate racialized families, try to separate Black families, Muslim families, and surveillance is a huge piece. And so I think it's important to also acknowledge the ways that like the physical presence of police informs policing practices in schools, right? Doing work at DJNO, we're looking at the experiences of disabled students with police and with policing in schools. And we've heard from students who have been suspended, expelled. There's one student, grade 7, has been suspended upwards of 30 times. And this is a grade 7 Black student. We're looking at things like, suspensions, expulsions, seclusion, which is, the use of like detainment, basically, putting students in small rooms, even sometimes closets, when they're deemed to be disruptive. There's the practice of restraints, the ways that restraints are being used against disabled students, against Black and racialized students, physical restraints, also exclusions, like off the record, when students are being sent home from school and unable to be in school. These are all policing practices. These are all informed by a police system in the surveillance state, kind of. And so, I think there is the physical presence, but I think on top of that, it's acknowledging like what the physical presence informs within these schools, right? It is this glorification of police as well. I'm thinking about even like my mom's school. My mom teaches at a school in downtown Hamilton. It's called Kathy Weaver Elementary School, and Kathy Weaver was a former Hamilton police officer. The school is named after a police officer. The first time right when you walk in the school, big picture of a cop, and this is the school. It's been deemed like the most high needs school in all of Hamilton, but there's this giant picture of a cop, and they have an article at the front that says something along the lines of kids and cops play basketball or something along those lines. An entire article about creating this culture where police and students can interact and be in community with one another. We also see this in the fact that the Ontario government, like Premier Ford, recently put forward something where the province is eliminating tuition fees for basic constable training at the Ontario Police College and trying to expand enrollment in a bid to get more police officers into communities. So there are just so many different facets, so many different ways that police insert themselves into educational institutions, and it's so foundational to everything that is happening in schools that it almost feels like there's no solution to it unless we are to completely bulldoze the entire system. And yeah, so I think looking at physical presence and how that informs surveillance and also how that informs policing practices in schools is really important.
Thank you, Ahona. The image of a big picture of a police officer when you enter a school pretty much sums up exactly what we're trying to think about here, because no one goes to school for that, and yet the school is named after someone. The school's glorifying that from the moment you walk in. This is that unholy partnership that we're really trying to bring out here. So thank you so much for that. Chantal, you're going to be next. Thank you so much for being with us.
Hi, Chika. And thanks to everybody who has shared so far today. I'm like taking many little notes on the side of my desk of things to follow up with people about. So I have been up here at Simon Fraser University, which is just on Burnaby Mountain in Burnaby, British Columbia. I've been here for about 4.5 years, and during my time as both a student and now a worker at a small not-for-profit that operates on campus, the ways that I've seen the institution use policing and security has been pretty atrocious. And it really started before, like, my experience with it started before I was even officially a student here. I was actually coming to a reading group for the report Red Women Rising, which is a report about the experiences of Indigenous women in the downtown east side of Vancouver and pathways to justice and liberation as imagined by Indigenous women in the downtown east side. It was a pretty quiet day on campus, downtown campus. And as I was going to the room where we were doing the reading group, a contracted security guard asked me if I would help him to remove somebody who was sleeping on one of the university couches, just like in a corner near an escalator. Which was definitely like quite an introduction to the way that space and who is able to access and use that space is really heavily policed by the institution. And that has shown up in quite a few ways in recent years as well. We just wrapped up a job action here on campus that was a job action of the Teaching Support Staff Union. And from the first day that strike happened, we were noticing people just like in the corners, like videoing us on their phones, as well as on like taking pictures, like recording on like also pretty professional devices. And during the second week of our strike, we found out that the university had actually contracted the Lionsgate Risk Management Group, which is a professional security firm that is also used to police and surveil land defenders along the Trans Mountain Pipeline. Students and community members were also getting regular emails from all levels of university administration about like how it was that they were policing and making sure that the community was safe during job actions. While there were people who were on the picket lines, strikers who were literally being physically assaulted by faculty members, as well as being struck by cars. So there was very little sense of safety or security for folks who were demanding their rights from the institution, while also being over-policed. We also, during this time of like what police even talk about as a crisis of recruitment, police are regularly coming onto campus at least a few times a term in full uniform to do recruitment, like literally like stopping people in the hallways, waving people down, bringing their dogs onto campus, using like the dogs as a tool to get students to approach them and learn about the police. Which is something that we've been advocating against for years as a student body, like literally for decades, is just like at the very minimum, stop allowing police to come onto campus to recruit students. And then we've also seen the violent arrest of a Black alumnus in 2020, which Desmond also used his platform to speak back against. This was somebody who was trying to use the university cafeteria, and some people were concerned that he was like a Black person trying to enter the cafeteria. They phoned security escalated to the RCMP, and he was quite violently arrested, which was all on camera and had significant pushback from the student body. SFU had hired a third-party investigator to review how that ended up being the situation that happened. There are very few people at SFU who have seen the full report of that, but it was conducted by a lawyer who has been very favorable to the police in the past. And then I think lastly, what I would like to bring up is just the leveraging of institutional resources to, in some cases, support the police. So thinking not necessarily here at SFU, although we do have individual faculty members who I'm sure have relationships to the police. We have a very famous criminology department here at SFU. But just thinking about how at Carleton University in Ontario, there's a police research lab within the psychology department, which leverages university resources to better the police, whatever that means. And then on the other side of that, how the university will use its resources to bring very esteemed abolitionist practitioners and theorists like Angela Davis and Gina Dent to legitimize themselves as well. Sorry, I didn't move for a long time, so my light went on. So there's all of these ways that the university is both like using the police are using the university as well. It's a very like symbiotic relationship, but then also the ways that universities like to, you know, uphold the like progressive status that they have. I don't even know a time when universities could be considered progressive in most cases, but trying to continue that by using folks who are actually abolitionists, like out there doing the work to end carceral structures. So yeah, maybe I'll stop there because I could just ramble on about this for a long time, but I want to hear the questions and be in conversation with everybody.
Thank you. And I think that for people to consider that police are going onto university campuses to do direct recruiting, this is something I think we often associate with the armed forces. And maybe people are not even aware that that kind of direct recruitment is happening. So I'm grateful for you sharing that, Chantal. Now I want to go back to Chief Namonks, because when you were talking about Coastal GasLink, you were talking about injunctions, which is something that has made a lot of the relationship between Coastal GasLink and the police really visible. And these injunctions mean, for example, that Coastal GasLink gets to send a lawyer to court to argue why people shouldn't be allowed onto their own territory. So Chief Namonks, I wonder from a treaty perspective, what does it mean when the government is allowing a corporation and the police to go onto a territory that the Indigenous peoples of that territory are prohibited from?
You know, with injunctions, they're created, it's like a slap suit. They want you to waste your time in court. Meanwhile, they keep working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So it's just a way of keeping you out of the way, you know, and we're non-treaty, and we've never ever agreed to anything to give anybody any kind of authority to attack the lands or anybody who lives on it. Like we've always said, we're here for the betterment of all. And that does not mean that let industry or the RCMP or elected governments come in and remove anything that they shouldn't be touching. Now, when it comes to the RCMP and their conduct and their support of injunctions, we go out there and it's just a constant. Like each time we go out, we're surveilled, we're followed, threats of arrest all the time. I simply ask them, like, arrested for what? Being on our territory? Going out for enjoyment, going out to actually monitor what's going on. And the RCMP are just constantly, they're just want their presence there to intimidate and scare. And it's rather unfortunate for them that we're Wet'suwet'en. Now, that's our land. We have every right to be out there. And the court cases that we're facing along with them working with these here security firms, that just strengthens us. That proves how actually failing they are in their mandate, their policies, and they just simply plead ignorance. Every time that we bring up a point of law to them, they'll say, oh, that's beyond my pay grade. And that's their simplest way out, is simple intimidation. And I don't think anybody should have to live under intimidation. We certainly don't tolerate it. We know we have every legal right to be out there. We've never ever done anything illegal on our lands. They've tried to say that we have, but we've proven we haven't. We, the Hereditary Chiefs, will say we'll use every avenue available to us, but we will not be violent. Because once you're violent, they have every right to move in. They still come at us with guns and dogs and helicopters, but that doesn't mean they have a right to do it. They are simply following industry. Now, I just heard the talk about them coming into schools. Like when I went to school, we had the Union Jack on the wall. And then we had the Queen's picture. So of course we had God Save the Queen and Away You Go and Whole Canada every day before you start. This past summer, I went to Buckingham Palace and I simply asked the question, why does everything that had royal in front of is there to hurt the Indigenous people? You got the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. You got the Royal Bank of Canada, who subsidizes and finances oil and gas projects throughout the world. They spent $220 million last year on it. But why does the word royal have to insinuate violence all the time? We simply want to be who we are. That's all. We're not breaking no law. The narrative they have out there criminalizes us, sure, but that doesn't make us criminals. We're not protesters, we're protectors. We have every right to follow our law. Our law says land, air, water first. That's what we follow. And yet they criminalize us. My fear is they'll get into elementary, high school, colleges, universities, and try to put the narrative out that what they're doing is for the future. And it's not. I think people should be well aware of the law. They should be well aware of the Constitution of this country, because it does say that we're doing the right thing and everybody has a right to stand up and speak. They're violent, their tactics. I come from a military family. I'm a son of a Second World War veteran, and I know he's rolling over in his grave, knowing what we're going through on a daily basis. And they say this is for the betterment of this country. No, it's not. It's not for the betterment of our youth, our education system, our health system. It's not in any way, shape, or form. And yet, if we normalize and allow this behavior to continue, where are we going to be at the end of this? It definitely isn't going to be democratic. You will be told what to do, and you will do it because that's what you'll be trained to do. You have a right to speak up. We only ask that you do.
Absolutely. I want to follow on what you're saying, Chief Namox, and go back to Sam, because Sam, you were talking about community groups where we get these arrangements where we find that the police are coming in and doing things like wellness checks. But just as Chief Namox has said, there's no permission granted. There's no prior consent that Coastal GasLink and the RCMP have. Who's giving the permission to the police and the school to, for example, share information about students or about people who use community groups? Like, where is that permission coming from? Because people don't sign up for community programming or community supports, or even school for that matter, assuming that that kind of information can be shared with the police without their consent, especially when it comes to children.
Yeah, you're so right, Desmond. I think, what's interesting is the community organization I work with works at the intersection of education and community, right? And the school board and especially administrators and superintendents are quite adept, as Chief Namox was saying, and quite proficient and can facilitate their role and their protection of the privacy of children, right? So when a young person is going through it at school and, hey, I want to come and speak, and maybe on behalf of the family or the parents, caregivers, or guardians, I'll quickly be met with, privacy laws. You got to sign this paper, you got to sign that paper. You can't come, I can't tell you the details. Meanwhile, the student or the parent or the adult has given us the details and said, Sam, or my fellow staff members, can you come help us with whatever the student is going through with the school? They're trying to kick them out, they're trying to expel, suspend, whatever. So your question is a really sharp one, because nobody gave them permission to share this list of students who didn't respond to these the school board wellness checks during this time. Nobody gives permission to community organizations to kind of check in and work with and collaborate with police, you know? So, but what we do have to understand is that policing holds this kind of unquestioning kind of veneer in our society, right? This kind of safety reflex I was talking about, you don't question police, right? Even through all that we went through post George Floyd and all the stuff that we have in Canada and 2020 and the kind of global questioning of the role of police in society, I think what we can say is clear with the things that Ford is doing with like basically making it free to go to like police constable training, with the kind of increased hype and recruitment, with the kind of ways universities and institutions are leaning even more into policing with concerns around unhoused folks, folks in mental crisis all over. We've even returned or probably doubled or tripled down as a society, is that's what the danger is, right? The unquestioning, like was not even a second thought for board officials at the highest levels and school elected board trustees to be saying, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's just call the police so that they can do wellness checks with these folks that we haven't heard from, right? And meanwhile, you're sitting on a committee that was meeting weekly with a whole bunch of community groups and organizations that could facilitate those kinds of wellness checks that don't introduce the possibility of danger, right? The possibility of quite literally death. This is not hyperbolic. This is what the Ontario Human Rights Commission has told us, is that when police are introduced into the equation of Black and racialized folks and queer folks and folks who live or work on the street, they have a disproportionately higher chance of ending up in death. So that is like, we had to let these education officials know that this is what was happening. But to answer your question, it's the fact that nobody gives permission and the police don't need permission, right? Nobody tells them what to do. And to Ahona, and I'm really impressed by your kind of really insightful and deep analysis, because I could not do that at your age. But when we dug into the kind of relationship that policing and schools had in Toronto, where when policing, the SRO program was in schools, it got very clear that nobody knew who the boss was in the building between the principal and the police officer. And these were, as police officers told us, these were low-ranking police officers within the policing institution. They had no idea what they were doing in school. Many of them did not want to be in schools. And the principals didn't know, who's the boss here? How do we mete out discipline? What is it? Is it like a criminal code? Is that statute? Or is it the Education Act? And all of that kind of unquestioning nature of policing and its firm place in our society permeates everything. So it's not even a question for education officials to give a whole list of phone numbers, addresses of folks that their wellness need to be checked on. Let's have the police do it, right? Sending out safety bulletins saying, hey, call the police if you want more information about your place of employment and who got arrested when and how safe we make you feel. Or even now, if I go cycling, trying to get as many cycling days in before it turns cold, and I'm seeing command SWAT, mobile posts, trucks at various intersections across the city because of the state of the world, right? So then, who are these moves or acts designed to keep safe, and who are supposed to be threatened by them, right? So I think again, to your question and the work that you did, Des, on carding, all of our information and our surveillance and our tracking has never been legal, but they got it in the database. And that is in part what constitutes their work. They are meant to keep us where we are, bordered, know our names, know how we associate, where do we go to school, where do we go to work, where do we consort, and that has always been part of their work since the founding of this kind of settler colonial country. Yeah. So.
Well, and I must say, Sam, that I have never seen a line item for the SRO program at the Toronto District School Board where I did so much work. You cannot find out how much money was spent or what pool of money it came from. And I think Chief Namox referred to this as well. It's like no one's authorizing this money to get spent when budgets are being passed. And then suddenly when the police want something from an institution, the money just magically appears. Chantal, I want to ask you about, you talked about the symbiotic relationship between university institutions and the police. What is it that the university is getting from this relationship? Because we know what the police are getting. They're getting access to communities. They're getting more territory and turf as a gang would, right? They're getting a lot of intelligence. But what are the universities getting out of these really tight relationships with the police?
I mean, I'll answer that as best as I could. I feel like university administration would be the best people to ask about that, which I will never be. But some of the things that we've been kind of highlighting, so I steward a group called No Cops on Campus, which has been a little coalition of workers and students and community members around SFU, who are trying to do harm reduction on just like having police not be as present, having like security, like policing not be as present, while also investigating kind of like these bigger structures. So one thing to take note of is that universities in British Columbia and across like the entire country are desperately underfunded, absolutely desperately. They are more and more, I think every school I've ever been to, more than 50% of the revenue of the university is student tuition. And there's another percentage that is tied to funding that comes in from private industry, like oil and gas, like forestry, like the tech sector, like arms dealers, to have researchers in the institutions who are doing research that legitimate their industries, the backup, the lobbying that they do in government, and that the universities increasingly become reliant on that kind of like corporatization through industry funding. So I would see that as like one way that the university is benefiting. I cannot speak to like what that looks like at my university or any university, because again, like you were just saying, these budgets are so opaque. Like everything is hidden in line items. But the university is also able to use the years, decades, like centuries in some parts of the country of the narrative that police make things safe. And especially in an era where there are many students and university community members who are coming forward, with like sexual assault cases. Universities want to be able to say to future students, like, this is a safe place for you. And the way that they do that is through policing. Especially when you look at a school like the University of British Columbia, which has its own RCMP detachment. It's actually the RCMP UBC detachment. And they operate as like the municipal police department of the university. And that university has a ton of sexual assault cases come from like fraternities, from faculty members, from student on student violence, right? So yeah, I think that those are like a couple of the ways that folks can, that like the university can feel like it's a beneficial relationship on their side, besides, having the scholars that have really made a name for work about like psychology and policing. There are quite a number of scholars who have made quite a name and a reputation that brings in big money, like research chair positions, whose work centers around carceral systems. And that benefits them too, because like at the end of the day, like as much as universities need money, they also need their reputation desperately. And they'll get it wherever they can.
I mean, it's a brilliant answer. And please don't take offense to the idea that I was trying to get you to put yourself in the place of the administration. I know you can't do that, but the trying to understand from our perspective what they're getting is so valuable, and you've done that really, really well. Ahona, everybody is talking about how hard it is to get information about these deals, about these agreements between police and these clients that we're talking about in this conversation. Now, you had to do that in order to fight back against the SRO program in Hamilton. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, what are some of the ways that people can start to do research to uncover these relationships? Where do they look? What steps do they take? And what kind of advice might you have around that?
Yeah, I think it's really complicated. I think when I put forward the initial motion to terminate the SLO program in Hamilton, it was really difficult. Like, I think I was 17. It was really difficult. I was super isolated. And I think everyone trying to do this work was isolated, and we didn't have access to the information that we needed. And I think the biggest thing, I think, outside of like research, like I think within research too, is like everything that we did was very community centered and community based. I think like one thing that I always try to center is the fact that like these systems will always undermine like community, will always undermine the stories of community. We came forward with, again, thousands, hundreds, thousands of testimonials coming from community members, coming from students about their experiences. And then they turned around and told me that wasn't real data. That those experiences were not valid because it didn't come directly from them. But I would say, regardless of like that narrative, we keep pushing and we keep putting those stories forward, because there is nothing that is going to push these systems like community and like public pressure. That is the only thing that worked, right? I always like think about the fact that in that moment, we had me in there internally, and then we had, Black and racialized folks who had been organizing for years on end, Black and racialized students. And it was kind of the perfect moment because we had that internal pressure and we had that external pressure. And yeah, I think it's really difficult to get information from folks. Like, even as a student trustee, it was super, super confusing. All the in-camera sessions, all of these processes that people go, like that these systems go through, are super inaccessible, right? It's so difficult to get information. But I think the other big thing is, like, I always say, FOI, like you always try to, some kind of investigation, whatever it was. Like, at the end of my term, I came out and exposed all of the racism, everything that was happening with the process, specifically with the termination of the police liaison officer program, but also with other instances of racism amongst trustees. And the school board did a third-party investigation into what had happened, and all the information about like what they had been hiding, all of the conspiring that they had been doing, it came out. That led to more public pressure, and that led to the censure of some of the trustees. And I think, yeah, everything kind of happens with public pressure. Everything happens when you continue to release that information and continue to center community voices regardless of what they say. So yeah, it's really isolating and it's confusing, but it can be done. And it's also about making sure that we always have at least one person in there to gather information.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. So Chief Namux, we're hearing about public pressure, public campaigns, and bringing things to light. You have been part of a group called Abolish Kurg. And that is actually how I heard about this community industry response group that the RCMP has, is through the work of this grassroots community campaign, Abolish Kurg, who are telling us that this group even exists when most people didn't know, and then demanding that it be disbanded. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the value of being part of that kind of a public campaign.
I think it's quite important because, you got to think about the civilian review, the CRCC. They were undermanned, understaffed. They couldn't get the information they wanted, so we put more public pressure to give them a little bit more power. Because you got to realize, when you're taking on the RCMP and the way that they conduct themselves, you're taking on a huge union in this country. And we also found out during that time, there's a conflict of interest with the RCMP, in particular with, the pipeline we're fighting. Their pension fund is tied to that project. You need to find these things out, because that's a conflict of interest that the public needs to be aware of. Full disclosure, at one time, I was the executive chair for the Canadian Federation of Students up here. So that's where I learned, dig deeper than what they're telling you. People, whether it be educational institutes or whatever, they have a good way to protect themselves. Why do you think the FOIs are so important? And it takes you a long time to get that information. The information is there, they're just not willing to release it. So ourselves, when we got involved with Abolish Kurg, it was simply because the province and the federal government was not doing it. I think they were afraid to take on the union. And every time that somebody was charged, you got to realize the highway that goes through our territory is referred to as the Highway of Tears. So many murdered and missing women. One of the incidents on our territory 2 years ago in regards to the pipeline, equipment got damaged. And I'll tell you, they tried to blame it on us, and Nothing. But you know, they sent 40 investigators for that and not one for murdered and missing women. They had 40 investigators out there. So that's the importance of belonging to groups, getting those questions out there, making them accountable. They're going to try everything in their power not to be accountable, but there's always a way when the public gets together and works. Whenever you can question them, keep it going and go above them. I stated earlier, I speak at the UN. I just got back from speaking with a group from Mexico fighting the same pipeline. What are they facing? What kind of tactics are being used on them? It's the same as being used on us. So they're not very inventive beyond violence. But if you could get the information you're looking for and bring it to the public, make the public aware, that's where power is. Knowledge is power. Like the RCMP, every time you hear about an incident, they're simply getting suspended with pay. Like if you do something, do you get paid and told to go home? They do. We need them to be held accountable for that. You know, when they're actually saying that's the normal, we're above you, we're the police. No, no, no. You're actually public servants. It is tax money paying you. We have a right to question them. We are not a militarized state. We have those rights, and it is about information. If you don't get the information out there, how are you going to get support? How are you going to get the right people asking the right questions at the right time? Today, you're learning a lot from each other because it is all about what is there. What is their template? Like think about the Northwest Mounted Police. You know, before they were called Royal Canadian Mounted Police, they were created simply to get rid of the Indian problem. What has happened in all this time? Here we are today with the same thing, except we're not called the Indian problem. We're called stopping progress. Well, if progress is destruction, I don't want no part of that. We as Wet'suwet'en, we never wanted more than what we have. We just want to protect what we have. And I think every human has that right. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. There's just so much wonderful knowledge being shared here. We started late. We've been gone about an hour now into this talk, and we wanted to go 90 minutes. I want to respect everybody's time and the commitments that you probably made after this. Does anybody have an issue with us going for another 20 minutes and then ending? Everybody seems okay with that. So thank you all for staying with us. Thanks to the audience. This is Scholar Strike 2023. We're talking about policing. We're talking about confronting the police and their clients. And we're engaged in a wonderful discussion here with 4 people with vast, wonderful and intersecting, I'm happy to say, knowledges. Everybody's kind of feeding into what everybody else is saying. And I'm so happy for that. Sam, would you like to reflect on anything that you've been hearing other people say, or bring up anything that you've not been able to mention to this point in the conversation?
Yeah, just jumping off of Ahona's and Chief Namox's points, there was a report that Neil Price and his, I think it's called Logical Outcomes Group, did in November 2014, Community Assessment of Police Practices. So it was a report on carding in November 2014, and it told our stories. It was out of 31 division, which is kind of like part of the police division in the Jane and Fringe area where I was mentioning much of the work that we do. And exactly what you said was the kind of response that the police chief at the time said, right? Oh, this is not, I don't know if this is legitimate research. I don't know what community-based research is. What kind of findings are these, right? And I think that takes us to Chief Namox's points about don't ever let them like take the veracity of our stories from each other, because they will do that. They will delegitimize our own stories, delegitimize our own kind of community cultural practices. And then that seeps into the kind of fear-based mongering that policing is so adept at, right? That there is no way to keep each other safe but for policing, right? There's no other way to be alongside with each other but for policing. And they mobilize this kind of ideology or discourse when they're at meetings, right? By threatening to pull out of communities that dare question the legitimacy or the kind of intrusion or everydayness that police plays, especially in high police communities, right? So they threaten us with our own safety and to be fearful of each other, and then question the legitimacy and veracity of our own stories that are, again, where I work, it's generations of this stuff, right? Like it was elders and community workers who put me on to the kind of community worker that I wanted to be. They were telling me about this reality of hyper-policing that goes back 40, 50 years. This is not an irrational fear. This is evidence-based. This is based on research, on reflection, on theory and analysis. That is what we do when we keep each other safe, when we find alternative practices, right? So that kind of zero-sumness that policing provides for us, that is the norm. That is still what we're working on. We're still trying to learn from abolitionists about that, right? And just the idea that pushing out the everydayness of policing, it's not an ideology or a system based in fear, but one of hope that we might be able to do this society thing differently with each other. That's not based in prisons and policing and hiding our social problems and discarding disposable lives, these kinds of things. So when we kind of work in our communities and have these kinds of conversations, that is also what terrorizes police, as Chief Nabox is telling us, right? That we dare imagine a different kind of reality with each other and based in hope, a critical kind of hope with each other, right? So that we cannot allow them to delegitimize our own forms of knowledge, yeah? Because that is also part and parcel of their process, right? So just to mention, Ahona, it is exactly part of the playbook when they tell us that the stories that we tell each other are not true because they're not based in some sort of research objectivity or veracity, yeah? So same playbook, different jurisdiction, I guess.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Chantal, let me bring you back if I can. And I know you're taking a bunch of notes on the side there as well. So why don't you go ahead and share some of the things that you've been thinking about as you're listening to others speak.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that really, whenever I hear folks talk about like policing and the ways that they've kind of woven themselves into other aspects of society, is how overwhelming of a task it is to unweave this in our work to abolish the police. It feels incredibly overwhelming, but it's also really heartening to hear folks speaking about the nuanced ways that they're thinking about this. I've been in conversations with Harsha where I've heard her, with Harsha Walia, where I've heard her say things like, this is not a technical problem. This is not just if we remove police from recruiting on campus, it's not going to disentangle all of the relationships that police have with post-secondary system, right? Just the same as it is everywhere. So thinking about like the nuanced ways that folks are describing, like the actions that they're taking to understand the problem and then disentangle it, is also really heartening. Thinking about these as like relational problems, and that relationally we also have solutions. So I'm feeling both very overwhelmed, but also incredibly heartened by the things that I've heard people say. And yeah, definitely taking lots of notes on the side here to bring back to my colleagues. And yeah, just want to express solidarity with each of you who have shared so far.
Thank you for that. And I hope everybody who's watching is taking notes, and remember that as part of Scholar Strike, you can go back to these sessions. You can suggest them in a classroom for your professor. If you're a professor, you can use these as supplementary lessons. That's the whole purpose of this alternate education programming. Ahona, give you a chance to reflect on everything that you've been hearing from the other panelists.
Yeah, I think like something that I think about like with everything that folks are saying is like specifically when it comes to schools, I think there's this unique, like the school system will always insist that like police are the exception, right? Like they're exempt. And I think when we create this like narrative of like where police are kind of glorified like day in and day out, and it's like consistently normalized, police become exempt from a lot of things that like other systems or other people wouldn't be exempt from. So I'm thinking about specifically like folks were talking about like military recruitment when it comes, or like police recruitment when it comes to secondary institutions, post-secondary institutions, but this is also applicable to secondary institutions. I found out recently that within the Hamilton Wentworth District School Board, the only co-op program that is paid, co-op programs are not allowed to be paid, but the Canadian Armed Forces comes into schools to recruit secondary students to work with the Canadian Armed Forces, and that is the only paid co-op in all co-ops, right? Like, and somehow they get to be the exception, right? Somehow they get to come into schools and recruit. Thinking about, the ways that, the Hamilton Wentworth District School Board recently tried to put a policy forward that would allow the school board within their education center to card people, right? Like, when folks come in to attend public board meetings, the ask was that they would write down their names and provide identification to come in, which is legally not permitted under the Education Act. That's something that's not allowed. It's illegal. But that is an effort that they were trying to put forth. And that shows how ingrained policing is in all of these systems, right? Because who will be targeted by that carding policy? It is going to be Black folks, racialized folks, marginalized communities. And there's also I think folks also talked about sexual violence and the occurrence of that when in the context of police, right? Talking to when I was trying to argue with trustees on the phone day in and day out that we need to vote for the termination of the police liaison program, an argument that kept coming up was police come into schools to teach students about sexual violence, to teach them about cyberbullying, these kinds of things, and how to be safe. And with respect to sexual violence, when we collected testimonials, we also heard from students who spoke directly about being interrogated, being questioned, being traumatized by police when they came forth with their experiences of sexual violence, right? We also heard from some students who were actually harassed themselves by police officers. And that is what's happening in schools, right? But for some reason, police are always the exception, and that's because day in and day out, they are glorified within schools, within educational institutions. And we've created this culture where they are the exception. Even thinking about, I can think of so many things, right? Even in 2019, there was a student who was stabbed and who passed away in a Hamilton school. And, the school board tried to use this as a way to be we need more police presence in schools. But the funny thing is, where were the police, right? When that happened, who was able to protect that student? It definitely wasn't them. They weren't there. They didn't do anything about it. But it's their own failures, their own violence is somehow weaponized to increase their presence in schools and to increase the power that they have in schools. And it's so it's maddening in a lot of ways. And so, I think that there's so much that's happening that feels contradictory and it really, really confusing. But that's what the weaponization of power looks like with these systems specifically. And I think one thing I'll note that's also really difficult in doing this work when students do this work is these systems will always protect police, and you cannot leverage critiques against police or you will be reprimanded, and you will face consequences. And that is coming from the folks who are working directly with police. The school board is working directly with police, and they care so deeply about upholding that system. But I think what's difficult is on the other hand, you are critiquing the public school board system, right? When you're critiquing police in schools, you're critiquing the system that is already drastically underfunded, drastically under-resourced. And so what you'll hear from folks a lot of the time when you're critiquing the system is don't take it too far, don't critique them too much, because that enables folks on the right to call for privatization, right? And so you have two kind of conflicting things happening where it's on either side of things, right? You can't critique because of that, the possibility of being reprimanded, but you also can't critique because folks think that will lead to another kind of reality where students are more in danger than they already are. But I think something I always try to get across is when I was a student trustee, the biggest thing that they always came at me with was, what is the alternative? What are we going to do instead? What are we going to do instead? And again, I was 17 at the time, and I was to be honest, there are a lot of things community members, the sexual violence, the sexual assault center of Hamilton was we're willing to come into schools and do this work. There were other community organizations, social services ready to come in and do this work who were actually equipped to do this work. And so that was one part of it. But the other thing was that I consistently said was, it is the lack of alternatives narrative is always going to be weaponized. But sometimes it does not need to be the center of the discussion, because what we know is what is in place is not working. People are being harmed, being violated, dying from what is currently happening. So get rid of it. And so, yeah, I think that's something that really needs to be centered. And I think it's just important to really just keep doing the work and keep like leveraging these critiques, keep calling out things for what they are, because people are going to have something to say regardless. But like, as someone who works directly with students, you know, I only graduated high school a couple of years ago. Like, we know what's happening in schools, and students know what they need. It's not our place to tell students what they need. It's our job to like uplift everything that they're saying. And so it's always just going to be about centering that at any given time.
You just gave us an unbelievable amount of knowledge in a very small amount of time, Ahona, but especially your observation that even the police's failures are weaponized to demand that we need more of them. That is critical, and I'm so grateful for you for putting that in such a concise way as you have. Oh my goodness.
Desmond, am I able to quickly just like add something to what Ahona was saying,
right
just
on
about
in.
like
No
the
one
gravity?
ever does this. See, I always have panels and we say jump in when you hear something, and no one
I'm
ever
gonna do it. I'm gonna do
Go
it.
for it.
Just to highlight like the gravity of what Ahona was just saying about the student liaison officers, and just that program and how like potentially quite dangerous it is here in Vancouver, students and parents and abolitionists and families work together to get the SLOW program out of the Vancouver school system.
SLOW program?
The Student Liaison Officer Program, SLO. Thanks for that. So they campaigned for a number of years to get that out of the school program, out of schools. And then the current ABC city government that we have, the Vancouver City Council, which is run by a man who was endorsed by the Vancouver Police Board. Immediately, their school trustees voted that program back in. It was like their first duty as an elected school board. And now, so that program is like back in effect, and there is at least one officer who was involved in the murder of a man who was also obfuscating investigation by the Independent Investigation Office, or the IO. So we have one person who we know of, an officer who was involved in a death at the hands of the police. And that there are also at least 3 other officers who are in the Student Liaison Officer Program who were involved in the bullying, harassment, and sexual violence perpetrated against a female officer until she committed suicide. That was the reason that she killed herself. And she is now a part of this. They are now a part of the Student Liaison Officer Program. So there are 4 people who we know are perpetrators of incredible violence who are involved in that program and are engaging with children every day. So that's just like the gravity of what it is that Ahona and Sam and other folks who are doing this work are fighting against.
Thank you. I want to get us out of here in the time that I promised. And so I've got 2 minutes for Chief Namox to wrap us up and to say anything you want to say in response to what you've been listening to.
I just want to encourage everybody to do exactly as the other speaker said. You challenge the system. You know, we always adapt and change, but they haven't. We used to have a program, we worked well over a decade. It was called Bridging the Gap, and that was with the RCMP. And yet they wouldn't change their training to bring, when they brought their cadets in, it remained the same. And within that too, I spoke at a number of quite prominent universities on the same thing. Bridging the gap, the way you train things. You've been doing it for decades. It's time to change. We always change. We have to. But they stick to the same. They have their template, and they adapt a little bit, but not enough to keep up with the times. They got to remember that if they can't keep up with change that is happening, they are endorsing violence. They are helping the RCMP continue the way they are. And never be silent. You got to remember that. You know, the only way to make positive change is to use a positive voice. And that's what I hear today. So thank you for that.
I want to say thank you to 4 incredible panelists. There's a lot going on in the world right now. There are a lot going on in people's personal lives at all times. And you answered my call. You answered my emails. You showed up here on time. And you've given us all a tremendous conversation, knowledge, things to think about and take away. I am so grateful to each and every one of you. And I know that everybody who's going to watch this and is watching this now is grateful as well. And I want to say that one of the reasons that it's been very difficult for me as an organizer right now to do this work is that my heart has been with the people of Gaza, as I know many of us are seeing and watching and thinking. And I know some of you who are watching today might be struggling because that's where your heart is as well. And I'm not going to end this broadcast without saying that we are completely here at Scholar Strike Canada in solidarity with the people of Gaza, with the tremendous suffering. We do name Israeli apartheid. We do name settler colonialism. We do demand an end to the siege on Gaza, an immediate ceasefire, the restoration of humanitarian aid, food, fuel, electricity, the end of the blockade that prevents others from entering Palestinian lands. We don't forget about the West Bank, and we continue suing for peace until the day that all Palestinian people can return to their lands and can live in safety and in freedom and free Palestine. Thank you so much to my 4 panelists. Thank you to Jen, who's working behind the scenes tirelessly to see the broadcast that you're watching right now. Thank you very, very much to our interpreters from ASL Pro Bono. You've done a wonderful job in carrying the conversation with us today. Thank you to all of you for watching. Thank you to the organizers of Scholar Strike Canada. We will see you in the streets. Love and peace.